Okay, folks, good morning. Welcome to the Fife Property Show this morning. Welcome to the viewers from TikTok. Rental recovery we're going to be talking about today. So what can you do when your tenant pays rent late or leaves with arrears? Arrears really are a dreaded word among landlords. And for anyone with even a mildly British temperament, an often uncomfortable situation to discuss and resolve. I mean, let's be honest, Richard, we're not all credit controllers, are we?
No, and it's not always an easy thing to do if you're not experienced or have the knowledge to how to navigate through it and how to. There's a lot of people skills involved in that as well.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
you don't primarily get into being a landlord to chase people for money.
no,
Everybody, and it's just like being in business and being self-employed. You don't get into business and be self-employed and run your own business to continually have to chase people for money.
mhm,
Everybody expects they should get their money on time every time, but on occasions it doesn't happen. Now, I've got to say, on very few occasions this happens. Very few occasions it happens. Your tenant pays late, or they leave with arrears on their account. It's very, very few and far between, isn't it, Richard?
yeah. I mean, we are fortunate enough not to have very few tenants behind on their rents and things and chasing a lot of arrears,
Yeah,
but we also know that obviously the current economic climate and the way things are could throw anyone's finances
yeah.
off. Of course, the cost of living and things is having a big effect on a lot of people at the
This
moment.
is what's going to have a fundamental difference, possibly. I mean, possibly, because I'll be honest, even the pandemic, we had the pandemic as well. And in the pandemic, the same sort of rules applied anyway, if not more
Yeah,
draconian. And the majority of tenants actually paid as usual. It was just business as usual. People have a moral compass within them. They
yeah,
know they're due the money. They know they've contracted to have a service. They don't. They don't think immorally, and just that's how we're not wired up like that. And that's why it's very few and far between it. People will just go, oh, well, you've now given me the advantage not to pay my rent. So I tell you what, I'll just no pay my rent. Because
yeah.
they're not like that. They're not that type of person. And that's why reference is so important in the beginning. We might talk about that as well, why it's so
Yeah,
important. But that's the type of tenant. So I'll be honest, if you go on Gumtree and advertise for tenants, you're more than likely to get the people we're going to talk about right here.
yeah,
They will not be attracted to a letting agent. These type of people don't pay, or just don't pay regardless if they can pay or not, because there's a screening process that will screen these people out, and they don't want to be found out. So they don't come to letting agents.
yeah.
So Gumtree is I'm acting like a bit like Donald Trump here.
It's true though. Gumtree and Facebook
I'm
and
going to have to
and that
stop
those types of places.
that. It's great. It's great. It's all great. It's fantastic. Anyway, that's my best Donald Trump impression. Although I never want to be like him, I've not got any admiration
No,
for him
no.
anymore. Yeah, absolutely. As the cost of living crisis bites, household budgets are actually getting squeezed, and rent arrears are more of a threat. Let's be honest about that. It may
Yeah,
affect you, but if your tenants do stop paying your rent, you need to act quickly to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. With that in mind, this week's show is all about everything you need to do to protect yourself from the start, to find solutions to financial hiccups and recover what you're actually owed. Remember, this is the only industry that some people actually think they still don't need to pay for the product that they're getting, and they can enjoy using it all the time. I mean,
yeah,
when was the last time you walked into a garage and says, I tell you what, I'll take your car out for a spin, I'll use it for 3 or 4 weeks, and if I don't like it, I'll just hand it back, and I'm not due you anything. Well, that's
yeah.
how
That's
some politicians, Patrick Harvey in particular, thinks the private rental sector should be looked at.
no.
Madness.
That's and as you say there, Jim, you do need to act quickly to prevent situations spiraling out of control because it can become really difficult if you let things spiral. But I think the best way to prevent rent arrears from
Yeah,
building up and causing financial woe is to set up tenancies correctly in the first instance and
yeah,
securely. And there's several ways to do that. And you mentioned one already, and one I think that's really important is proper referencing. Now, I can't stress how important this is, yet we still have plenty of landlords who are happy to accept tenants without checking their status. Now, I mean, to make light of it, I mean, like Julia Roberts says, big mistake, huge. I mean, it's the worst mistake not to reference somebody properly. And that is a very integral part of the initial letting process, and we take that very seriously. Because it kind of sets things up. It sets the tone, and it also lets you know exactly who you're dealing with. So that needs to be done properly. That hand in hand with face-to-face viewings. Now, I would never rent to anyone that you haven't met in person, or you haven't, or wasn't inside the property and had a look at it. Now, we get this a lot, obviously, the way things have changed, technology, virtual viewings and things. People expect to be able to look at a property online and take it and things. Now, it's brilliant because we could do all the paperwork online. Yeah, we have it quite a lot.
It was like, I'll just take the house. It's like, but we don't even know who you are and where you're from. It's like, but I'll just take the house. It's like, but we've never seen you. Oh, why do I need to be face to face? Because one thing is we're giving you the landlord's biggest tax-free asset outside of his own house, which is effectively about £100,000 worth on a trust and not even meeting you. And the other thing is, how likely do we know, with no even reference you or screened you, to make sure you could actually pay the rent and look after the property? This is actually quite interesting. Somebody's actually said on TikTok, my landlord actually rented the property to me. They didn't do any repairs or stuff like that, and was left affecting our health. Well, I'll be honest, you just have to make sure you get the right landlords. So we concentrate highly on actually attracting the right landlords. If we do not have the right landlords, and landlords do things like that, it'll be sayonara, landlord. Bye-bye.
I think we need
not
to have,
deal with you any longer.
Landlords need to be willing and able to keep up with the repairing standards of the property and be willing to provide that property at a certain level. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Absolutely. But yeah, the virtual viewing things is something that's caused a wee bit of issues because obviously we're at that stage. There is a few instances where people are coming from overseas and things where it is difficult. I have in recent times had somebody, a representative on their behalf, be at an actual face-to-face viewing, have them on obviously FaceTime or whatever. And I've done situations like that, and that has worked. But there needs to be some sort of face-to-face. I mean, it's basically like an interview when you're taking on a property.
That's what referencing is. It is an interview to see if you're suitable for the property, to see if you're suitable for us. It's amazing how many tenants are in a good financial position, but they're so difficult to deal with. And and we actually refuse them for that reason. And they're wondering, they're at us hammer and tong, going hell for leather at us, saying that's unfair and all the rest of it, but they don't realise that's what's happened. We just say you're not suitable for the property. That's it. Because it's like, if we take these people on, it's like, my God, how difficult is it going to be for us to get in for a property, a preventative maintenance visit? How difficult is it going to be for a contractor to get in the door to actually fix something straight away? And then the next thing that comes with that person is like, they've no let us in the door. Something it does allude to what we've got in here is like, oh, my landlord always gives me a damp property, but you've no let them in the door to fix that problem. And then the next minute, we're all castigated for it. We're the person caught in the middle between the landlord and the tenant. So it is actually making sure they're proper for us as well, just as well for the property, and they like us to deal with them. So there's a lot of tenants who will actually just go primarily to letting agents, a particular letting agent, because they know they can deal with them day in, day out, and they know their procedures, and they know they can get things turned around, and they will know they will act on their behalf to get things done, and lobby on their behalf as well with the landlord, because it is a lobbying exercise with the landlord as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And like you say about the tenants and things, I mean, using us as an agent, there's tenants we've had for a lot of years that through the years maybe landlords have sold and things and they've had to move on, but they've asked us, please find me somewhere else so I can stay with you guys because I feel comfortable with you and want to stay with you. And that's the kind of relationship you want to have with tenants.
What about rent guarantee insurance? I'll be honest. What you tell me what rent guarantee insurance is, and I'll tell you my experience.
I know your take on it. I know your take on it, but
I'll tell you. Yeah, you know me.
Tell you what it is.
Don't know me about rent guarantee insurance. I'll tell you. I'm quite straightforward, shoot from the hip.
Rent guarantee insurance does offer a sense of invaluable security, especially right now for the relatively small monthly cost that it does have. Now, typical policies cover you for around about 6 to 12 months, depending on what the terms are, together with legal fees involved in regaining possession and things if you have to go down that route. So as long as you have a satisfactory tenant reference, which is, there's a lot of loopholes with tenant guarantees, cover is available for new and existing tenancies. But speaking of loopholes, Jim, we've come up against that in the past, and I mean, it just kind of makes you wonder, is it worth the paper
guarantee
it's
insurance? If you read the small print, it's your deposit is taken as one of the down payments on the rent guarantee insurance, and then the first month's rent has to be paid up front, which is another down payment. So you're not really getting 6 months rent guarantee insurance, you're getting 4 months rent guarantee insurance. And then you have to make sure you follow up on the correct procedure in order to serve, you know, as soon as the rent becomes 1 day overdue, you have to be on the tenant like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. And also,
and it's like, who wants to live in a tenancy where your letting agent is on you like a ton of bricks every single time 1 day passes? But that's effectively how rent guarantee insurance actually expects us to behave. We're on to people straight away. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. You need to give people a bit of leeway here. This is a come and go thing. Maybe somebody's just obviously maybe forgotten. Maybe their bank's taking a wee bit longer to transfer the money. You know, all these different things can actually happen. Maybe something's happened at their bank. It's fallen over their standing order or whatever they've got. So you've got to give people a chance to actually come up with a reasonable answer to that question, rather than actually dealing them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, because I mean, if you'd like that, then I'll just push people out the door.
Yeah, I'm doing that to emphasise that that's exactly what rent guarantee insurance expects you how to behave with a tenant, and I don't believe in that at all. I'll be honest, if you get the right letting agent and you're okay, I'm not a big fan of rent guarantee insurance. I don't think I've ever used it. I did try on one occasion to prove that model. So this is the key here. I try to prove things to make sure it is what they say it is. And if it isn't what they say it is, then I just call them out as bullshit. That's it in a nutshell. and honestly, to me, rent guarantee insurance isn't worth the paper it's written on. It's very few.
I have to say, and I've advised other landlords and things throughout the years that sometimes you need to really check what the cover is, and really, is it worth the paper that it's even written on? It also says there about, obviously, together with proper references and things as well. So you need to make sure that process is done properly. You have all the right information, because they'll pick at that as well when it comes to looking to make a claim.
Anything and everything to avoid actually getting paid out.
Oh yeah.
That's so effectively rent guarantee insurance for me is money for old rope.
Yeah.
But most of the insurance industry is like that anyway.
I know, but obviously insurances are something that's important, and you do have to have in terms of obviously like landlord's insurance and things as well. But if you've got a good agent in place and you've got a tenancy set up properly at the start, then you're not going to have to use rent guarantee.
Yeah, but for anything, if you want to look further into that and you want to look at a previous show we've done, we've got the link on here. Unfortunately, TikTok doesn't allow me to do that, guys, because it doesn't give you all the information to put on here, whereas our social media pages do. So if you've got YouTube, Fife Properties channel, you'll get them in the Fife Property Show playlist. If you're on Facebook right now, you can get that as well, that link. And what kinds of insurance a landlord should actually have. Getting your late rent paid. You know, what's that all about? Is it it's good practice maybe probably to check your bank statements religiously on the first working day after the rent is due. It is good practice to do that. I keep a ready reckoner all the time with the number of days outstanding. I put in the date, exactly when the money was paid, and I put in the date actually when it's due, and it falls out, and as soon as it goes at -1, I'm like, okay, what's happening with that? Now, if I know traditionally this person actually pays maybe 3 days later, it's like, yeah, okay, I've got it written next to it. They pay 3 days later. So that's fine. So you're not on tender hooks every single time. Remember, this isn't a let's jump on them straight away. You've got to make, because if you're doing that every single time, the tenant's like that, the tenant will just leave. And this type of market right now, you know, most landlords will go, well, who cares? Because I can get somebody else. It's like, but I tell you what, you're maybe like that when it's going up, but when you're coming down, you're going to need everybody as much as possible. And that's where a fantastic reputation as a landlord will give you a very, very high occupancy rate. And that's what you really want. There's the key indicators there.
I was just going to say that's the key
indicators. Occupancy rate. and you potentially get a higher rent as well, because people know that you will do things when you do them, and you will look after them as well. It's just like the service thing. It's just like, you know, people buy a Rolls Royce for a Rolls Royce. If they just want to get to A to B, and that's how everybody thought, we'd all be buying the cheapest car in the market.
Yeah.
But other people are prepared to pay for a particular service. So it is good practice on the first working day to make sure you just check, why is the rent no here? A missed payment doesn't automatically mean your tenant has actually gone rogue. Yeah, as I said, it could be nothing more than a personal oversight or a bank error or a short-term financial glitch. Nonetheless, it's essential to act immediately to stop 1 month's late rent from turning into 2 months and more.
Yeah.
So we're going to follow these 3 simple step processes to get your rent up to date as soon as possible. What are these, Richard?
Yeah, and as you say, Jim, do you know, glitches with people's banks and things like that, they're so common, and it's not good to just pounce on somebody. So start with a gentle but obviously firm reminder. Text is a really good thing, and email not so much as text. I feel we find that text is a really good point of communication, initial point of communication with a tenant.
It's
Asking your tenant.
non-confrontational. Text is
Yes.
non-confrontational. Okay, so that's what I would. And text is an easy one to say to someone. Look, you know, obviously, we would have expected your. What could we say? We expected your rent to come in, and you know, is there
Or we just noticed that your
anything we can help with?
Yes, and I think that's the thing as well. Always reach out with a point of like a helping point to them, like we can assist you instead
people,
of like you say.
This is where most people actually come back to you and say, it's like, oh, I had no idea. It's like, I'll check with the bank.
It's so common.
99 times out of 100. So don't go in all guns blazing.
No, I think even if you text saying, obviously, just asking them, maybe check your bank, your rent's not come through, the payment's not went through, or if they know why the rent wasn't paid, if there's maybe an issue, a different issue, and that's a good starting point. Obviously, if that doesn't work, follow up with a phone call, and if you've received, obviously if you receive no response, say about 24 hours or so, then with a formal letter following that. If you've not heard back after several days, I mean, usually that works. I mean, text them, phone call, and things.
The other thing you could do is, obviously, if you've got an email tracker, then you could actually send the email to them, because you know, we do get everybody's emails. So send an email to them, and it'll tell you if they read it. So if they read it, we know they've actually seen it.
Well, that's the thing.
99 times out of 100, though, Richard. Again, somebody maybe won't reply to you, but they'll just pop it in the bank and sort it out.
Yeah.
So let it settle for a wee while. Just didn't come on to people like a ton of bricks. Remember, they're just like you and I. How would you feel if somebody was constantly at you saying, "You're 3 hours late"? It's like, you know, it's like, well, just give me. I've got another life. I've got my life to lead.
Yeah, people have got lives. That's what
I've got my job to think about at the same time. It's like, just slow down.
Yeah, and I think that, like you say as well, Jim, if that doesn't work, then obviously you follow the different steps through. If that doesn't work, then speak to them, make a plan. Ideally, your tenant will get their rent paid up to date as soon as they can. I mean, in most cases, that's what will happen. But if they don't have the funds to do it right now, then that's when you look to settle with a payment plan and things.
So give an example of a payment plan then.
Well, I mean, depending on the level of arrears that they're sitting in, it could be something that's really manageable for the tenant within their income and monthly outgoings and things. So we've sat with a few tenants that have struggled, I mean, in their situation, and looked at what they've got coming in and what's going out, and then agreed on an amount that they can afford. There's no point in agreeing a payment plan with somebody that's, oh, I'll pay you an extra £50 a week, but that's an extra £200 a month. Can you really afford that? Do you know what I mean? That's just unrealistic, maybe. Do you know what I mean?
You get that, don't you? Where actually some people do that. You know, a few tenants out there actually just want to tell you anything to make you go away. And they do say things like, I'll pay you an extra £50 a week. And you're looking at what they're earning, or they're maybe actually on benefits. And it's like, there's no way you could afford 50 quid a week. So it's taking it down to a manageable amount. So then it's more like about 30 quid a month rather than 50 quid a week. So even though you think they could do, 50 quid a week, I would actually recommend probably bringing it down to about 40 or maybe 35 a week if that's the case. Only because if somebody continually misses their target, they feel very demoralised and demotivated. And especially with rent collection as well. And if you're making somebody do that and they're continually missing it, and you're not doing anything about that, if they're continually missing it, then you're actually sending a message to them. It's like, I'm not really that particularly bothered and I'll not really chase you up. So it leaves you in a vulnerable situation as a debt collector. I only know this because I've collected millions and millions of pounds on behalf of manufacturing companies I've worked with before, because I used to work as their credit control manager in the construction industry, actually. So you could leave them with that impression that you will just let things go anyway. So you have to be pretty sure about what you're going to do next if that's the case. And you have to stick to that plan as well. So making ideal threats is, never going to work, because unless you're prepared to follow them up, it's going to fall on deaf ears forever. And it's going to make it worse for your relationship with your tenant. So my recommendation is you come up with a plan. Let the tenant say what they would want to do, and if you think it's unrealistic, then just be honest and say, look, I think this is probably more appropriate to do. You're there to help people to get back on track.
Yeah,
you're not there to draw them into the ground.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to find something that's manageable for the tenant and suits both, and it might be something that everybody can agree on, everybody's happy moving forward with. You set an unrealistic target for rent repayments and things, you're just going to be back in the same situation weeks or a couple of months down the line.
And it's not nice, especially the stress it puts on you as a landlord or investor, and the letting agent as well, and also the tenant. Everybody gets stressed in that situation. Why not just come up with an agreement where everybody wins? Yeah. That's the whole point. The objective of the exercise is to keep the tenant in their tenancy, to keep a roof over their head, not put them out on the street.
Yeah.
The only way eviction happens, and I'll be honest, the only way eviction happens is a very last resort, when every other path is exhausted. So whether it's a one-off thing or your tenant is prone to paying a few days late, knowing that you're on the case can be all they need to know to pay on time and avoid the embarrassment of continually being chased up. But if you do know your tenant pays continually late, and it's not them paying late, it's probably because they've set their standing order up for 3 days after the rent was due. And it's like, if that's what they've sent their standing order up and it's coming through as a standing order, you'll know that in the bank account anyway. It's like, just leave it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're 3 days continually late. Some people are just like, they've got to be on time every time.
Yeah,
it's
I've
like,
had a few people.
Get a grip. Just relax. Take it easy. You know it's coming in. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I've had a few landlords over the years who, obviously, the rent due date's whatever day it is, and it always comes in a day or two, and it's always on time, but a day or two later than the time. And I'm like, well, just leave it like that. But yeah, you need to be able to let people live, and if that's the way it is, at the end of the day, they're paying their rent. A day or two is not going to make much difference to that, as long as it's kept on top of.
So how do we deal with unpaid arrears then?
I mean, tenants can fall into arrears, and there's a number of reasons for that. I've seen quite a lot of them: relationship breakups, losing their job, becoming ill, or simply having troubles with like the increased cost of living that we're having at the moment, and it can quickly put anyone into financial difficulty.
So now, the first thing I would say to a tenant, if you get any of these things, speak to your landlord or your letting agent straight away. Definitely. They are not there to jump on you like a ton of bricks. They are there to help you straight away. The quicker you can speak to someone, the quicker you can get it resolved. Even if it means going to citizens' advice or that. But citizens' advice is usually last resort if all else fails. You should really speak to your landlord or your letting agent and try and resolve it as quick as possible. Even and then it sets a good track record as well. It sets the fact that the letting agent or the landlord knows not to worry too much if your money is late, because they know you're going to tell them anyway. If it is. So it's just like anything, to establish a really good relationship, even in a job, for example, that's what you do. You don't just keep it from your boss and say, well, I didn't think you needed to know. And it's like, what? Okay, we were hemorrhaging money like left, right, and centre, and that wasn't important. I mean, I'm making wild examples and I'm making exaggerated examples, but I'm wanting people to understand where we're coming from and the mindset and how that is. Okay, back to you.
Yeah, and I mean, although these conversations, they can be uncomfortable, and that's a big reason why people use agents and managing agents and things, because they do that on their behalf, and we are trained and obviously got the skill and do it day in, day out, know how to approach that properly. The first steps to get total clarity with your tenant situation, and that's what a big part of our job, if it comes to this situation, is to speak to the tenant and clarify their situation. A compassionate nudge around their finances and how they're living could lead to a solution that they may not have got to on their own, and that's really important. And there's a few different reasons that we do this. And I mean, if you ask your tenant if they've considered using maybe like a budget planner or help them budget, people, like we've spoken about this before, Jim, budget planning and things like that is not taught to you at school. Who teaches you it? Unless your parents teach you it, it's not part of your education.
No one teaches it at all.
Yeah.
That's the reality. But we as landlords or investors and letting agents, we go in with an expectation that almost like everybody knows what we know. And this is what you have to understand. They do not know what you know. That's why you're in that job, because you know what you know. That's why they're not in that job, because they don't know what you know. So it's the old thing about, you know, we've said it before. I mean, ask your tenant if they've considered a budget planner to identify the short-term cost savings. The classic examples, the ones are. And I see it every single time. You know, when I used to be boots on the ground for the first 20 years, I managed all my properties myself, looked after everything myself. I tell you what, it's no for the faint-hearted. It is a big exercise. So I did all that myself. But when I sat with people and said, you know, how could we sort this out? It was like, I'll be honest, the 40-inch television was sitting in the living room. The subscriber, the skybox was in there as well. The taxi was coming to the front door. The cigarettes and all the rest of it. And it's like you're saying you can't afford it. I'm no surprised you can't afford it, because you've got all these things that you've actually surrounded yourself with, which is a constant drain on your finances. And it is the things like Netflix, the gym memberships, the coffees, the takeaways that mount up. They can also free up useful cash when suspended. Did you know Netflix will actually suspend your account for about 6 months and give you free for 6 months just to keep you as a subscriber? If you phone them up and saying you're going under financial hardship, Sky will do the same, Virgin will do the same. They'll all do that. They'll all do a suspension period, but they'll actually still let you use the service, and they'll give you that moratorium, for that period of time to let you get through things. So they want to keep you as a subscriber, because subscriber numbers to them is important for the city, and to make sure that the shareholders actually have faith in what they're trying to achieve. If you continually say, well, we've dropped by 1 million subscribers this month, share price, boom, straight to the bottom, because they realize that then has no residual income coming in every single month. If you still go, we've got 1 million subscribers than the year, still now, than the next month, even though they're not paying, some of them are paying a lot less, it still gives complete faith in the city, and the shareholder price actually is supported for that reason. So these are all key indicators that these industries work on. So it's actually really important to do that. But it is. Are you back? Somebody came on to the other day and said, and I said, you can make a baked potato and beans and veg for under 50 pence. And he went, you can get a tin of beans as £1. And I goes, where are you shopping, mate?
I was just going to say.
A little there's a pack of 4 tin of beans for blooming £1.9. Yeah, it's like, you'll need to, and I actually put our cost of living show, how to beat the cost of living show crisis, how to beat the cost of living crisis show in the actual comments. And he went, good shout, mate. I never even realised that at all. He didn't realise that paying £1 for a tin of beans is actually quite extortionate.
Do you know, after we done the cost of living show and highlighted all these additional luxury items and pleasure things that we do, I stopped buying Starbucks. I think I've bought one since. I've got a coffee machine now, and it's just Starbucks will bankrupt you.
There are other coffee chains available.
Yeah, I know, and I know you're a Costa person, but or the local ones as well. But anyway, but yeah, the cost of living one's a really good one on it's a wealth creation show. So yeah, you'll find that in the playlist on YouTube as well. Some good ones in there. But yeah, also in addition to that, explore whether other members of the tenant's family could help them financially. Do you know if they're in that situation, and whether they've got family members or somebody that could help them out of that situation, or even possibly become their guarantor? if your tenant obviously wants to stay in the property, then help them find that route to do that. Do you know there's situations in the past, Jim, where we found, and there's family units and they're really struggling and there's benefits and things, and they actually didn't realise that they were entitled to benefits that they weren't claiming. And once we went through that process with them and made them realise, look, you're entitled to this, you're entitled to this, and it put them in such a better financial position.
That's key as well, actually, getting people in touch with the right support, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not just, I mean, letting agents just don't collect, well, we just don't collect rent.
No.
We also put people in touch with the right support mechanisms, the external bodies that actually can help people manage and budget their expenses. That's a really important thing to do.
Yeah, we've got, I mean, obviously things like Citizens Advice and that are quite good. We have done referred a lot of people through the years to Trust in Fife and other organisations that really help people that are in situations that they're struggling financially. So yeah, I mean, that's what an agent should do, is have that duty of care and compassion to a tenant's circumstances and help them stay in the property. Like you say, we're not just wanting to evict people, it's the last resort.
No, why would you want to do that? I've put that link in the post, by the way, in the comments. It'll be coming up, how to beat the cost of living.
That's a good one.
The show we actually did. So that's a really good one for everybody to engage with. So go on.
Yeah, so encourage your tenant to speak to things like the Citizens Advice, or like I say, we do Trust in Fife and things, and see what they're entitled to, and so if they've got needs to financial support from the government. If your tenant says they can't afford to live in the property anymore, remember they do have a security deposit, which can cover some of their unpaid rent, but that could only be used at the point of obviously the tenancy ending in Scotland.
And
so,
provided it's written into your tenancy agreement, you could actually use the security deposit for rent. If it's not written into your tenancy agreement, you can't use it. It has to be returned, and it's only there for any damage to the property that's actually happened. So that's vital as well. Again, that's another wee top tip for investors and landlords out there, and probably letting agents, because I'll be honest, anybody can start as a letting agent right now. It's like, yeah, hey, I'm a letting agent. How long have you been going? What experience do you have? Oh, I just started last week. It's like, what? So what do you know about the 147 pieces of legislation that's in place right now? There's I just thought it was just a case of just starting and getting a copy of somebody's lease and just putting it, aye, okay then, aye.
Yeah, I mean, and then if you go through that scenario with your tenant, and for the tenants who don't respond and don't want to obviously work together with you with these attempts obviously to get in touch and work through things, then unfortunately then it may be time for them to move on.
Yeah, which is again, as I would say, is the last resort. You don't ever want to do that, really, do you?
No, but unfortunately now and again it does happen. But and then that would probably bring us on to how you would get your property back. And sometimes you have no choice to try and regain possession of your property, and perhaps your tenants need to be evicted, and maybe they need to be evicted to get maybe a local authority property. We've seen that in the past where obviously they need an actual notice to move on to get a local authority property. I mean, that's quite a difficult feat at the moment because there isn't enough to house everybody. But anyway, or they could simply be refusing to pay what they're owed, and that's not a situation you want to be in. And if you've followed the lines of communication that we've just discussed, then you shouldn't get to that point. But depending on the circumstances, letting your tenant out of their contract might be the easiest route. So you can relet the property, start earning income again, and you'll also create a path for new tenants to pay back by moving to somewhere that they find cheaper and more affordable. And that is maybe the reason, because
I wouldn't want to use the word cheaper. I would say less expensive.
More affordable.
Cheaper. Well, that's a good one, actually. Cheaper implies that there's an inferior product getting offered to you. It's just the very fact it's maybe a smaller accommodation. It's
and more suitable, probably,
more affordable for your budget you've got just now. It doesn't mean to say anything other than that. So there's nothing wrong, again, with going to speak to your letting agent. And we do that sometimes as well, where somebody's actually circumstances about, I used to do this all the time. A big family, so we need a big house. By the way, we've split up. Everybody's left the house. I'm on my own. Okay, no bother. I'll put you into a one-bedroom flat we've got. And That's the type of thing I'm talking about, because they immediately say, well, I can't afford your rent. It's like, that's fine. You've been a fantastic tenant. We'll find you a 1-bedroom flat with us. We'll move you into there. Is that okay? Absolutely. So I've done that all my years, Richard. And
I'm doing it with a couple of years at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm moving one guy into a 1-bed, the others into to do. Yeah.
So we love to look after people. We'll love to people continue to stay with us because they're really good tenants. They're really good people. I mean, I hate calling them tenants as if they're a different breed of person. I hate the fact that the government doesn't recognise landlords as people. They just call them landlords, as if we're a different type of people. If you cut me, I will bleed. Effectively, I am a human like everybody else, but they seem to have this draconian attitude towards landlords and tenants and the way we are. But it's just a label, I would say, to make it clear what everything is. But they're people like everybody else, so it's like, you know, most of them are actually still really good friends, and we still see each other in the high street and stuff like that, and they are living with us still in different accommodation. So it is about mixing, matching, and moving them to the more appropriate circumstances. I've had 3 generations of families staying out at one point, and they've all moved into one house, then they've all had their own houses, then they've all lived in different houses and different flats, and then moved to different areas, and then they've all had friends that have come to stay with us as well, because we've actually provided them with really good service as well. So your reputation precedes you in how you do things, and you keep a high occupancy rate because of how you look after people. And it is the classic example about, you know, if the boiler breaks down, you go and fit it and fix it straight away. And if it needs a new boiler, you spend the money and get the new boiler. No matter if it's 2,000, 2,500 quid, you spend it. Oh, but they've only been in a month. They've only paid a month's rent. It's like, and your point is, your duty of care is to look after the tenant and make sure you have a duty of care towards them as well. So if you have to pay £2,500 to replace the boiler there and then, you'll have to pay £2,500, even if you've had the property for 6 months, possibly, because you're a new landlord. This is why it's appropriate to make sure you have cash reserves to do that. And this is why it's appropriate to make sure that you actually charge the right market rent. The right market rent is not about getting you a new Ferrari. It's very few and far between people that actually do that.
Or a Lamborghini.
You only see that on television. Most people have 1 or 2 properties, that's it. But I make the point quite large so people actually understand. It's the reason that we charge the market rent is so we can reinvest back in the property when anything goes wrong, and have a preventative maintenance strategy to make sure the property is always looked after and the tenant is looked after, more importantly. After all, we're in the service business. We're in the service business. If your customer is no longer there, you're no longer getting any income. That's what it comes down to. And then your costs start to mount up. This is the opportunity cost, opportunity loss. You know, if you've got a property that's empty and you're getting £500 a month, and it's costing you now, maybe because the council tax is kicked in, another £150, you're effectively losing 700 quid a month, because it's 550 plus the 150 council tax that you're paying. So by putting a tenant back in, you're actually making £700 a month instead of 550 a month, because you're no longer paying the £150 council tax that you're having to pay.
See, people will look at it like that.
And then you've got standard charges as well. Standard charges for electricity and gas. If you've got to pay them as well, that's added on as well. So that £700 a month that you're actually costing you, because you're losing it, is actually then about £800 a month possibly, especially in this environment. So that's another thing. That's another opportunity cost, opportunity loss.
I was going to say you're going to win another show.
I'll put that in the comments. No, that's another show. But it's true though, isn't it? It is true. It's like that's how it. Like I digressed. Okay, I go off on a tangent sometimes. So let's get back to the meat and the bones.
Yeah. So obviously, if you're in that situation and you get to the point where obviously notices are being served, and obviously that's what we're having to do now. I'll cover both. I'll cover Scotland and England. So if your property is in England, Wales, or Northern Ireland, you can serve notice by now. Firstly, a Section 8 notice after the arrears hit 2 months for the rent being paid monthly, or 8 weeks for the rent paid weekly. Right, it's a bit different in England, but bearing in mind that the process can be over a year with the current court backlog in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
This is what people don't realise as well. It's like, you know, it's if my tenant's 2 months in arrears, it's like, oh, I could just evict them. and the rest. It's like then you've got to get the eviction to kick in, which has got to be a certain period. of notice. And then once the eviction is, if they've not left, then you have to apply to the court for the eviction order. That could take about 6 months to a year to do that. And all that time, if your tenant isn't actually paying rent, then you're losing 6 months to a year. How can I afford to lose 6 months to a year? I hear you saying as a landlord. And if that's the way it's few and far between, remember.
Yeah.
If that's the way you're thinking about it, maybe buy to let isn't the investment you should be doing.
Yeah.
Because
you need to be prepared for these kind of scenarios. But yeah, Scotland,
this
England.
This is why, Richard, I'll come back saying this is why what you said previously, the referencing is the key here.
At the beginning.
And getting guarantors and making sure you've got everything, all these boxes ticked. You're not going to get it every single time. I mean, I think Jeanette touched on that and the fact that you will get caught out now and again. But remember, and she did go on to say it's not a partnership of equals anymore, because tenancy law is a lot more draconian on us than any. Well, landlords really didn't have any rights at all now. The way all the legislation's gone, but it's important to get the right tenant and have the right relationship in order to make that possible. That's probably the best thing you could actually do.
Yeah. So just obviously, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, you've got the Section 8. You've also got a Section 21, which is a no-fault notice. So if
which we used to have in Scotland.
Sorry?
Which we used to have in Scotland.
We used to, but that's no longer in place. So it's a no-fault notice. If the tenancy is beyond its original term, then seek accelerated possession, which doesn't need a court hearing. If your tenant refuses to leave after 2 months notice period. All right?
Yeah.
In Scotland, I'm sure most of us are aware, but we'll recap. In Scotland, there's currently a ban on evictions, a limited ban on evictions, but you can still apply for an eviction order to enforce after the ban subsides.
At this point in time, what is that limited ban on evictions?
Your tenant needs to be 6 months or more in arrears.
When is that limited ban on
evictions? The 31st of March 2023.
So there's a moratorium on evictions right now in Scotland until the 31st of March 2023, and they're actually saying they might actually extend that another 6 months or 12 months.
I'm expecting that to happen. It's like with the coronavirus act and the ban on evictions extended that.
I don't think that will happen, because I think that's political suicide.
I think it is as well, but you never know.
Especially the amount of landlords that are actually exiting the market. And I don't speak about this lightly now.
No.
Most of the times it's always been a veiled threat in the past where, landlords will leave the market, and everybody went, yeah, okay then. Where I was going, I'm buying. I'm buying. It's like buy, when everyone's going sell, and I'm going buy. It's like, that's how I know the signs. When everybody's panicking and you keep your head all right up here, then you could spot the opportunities coming available, and that's what's happening right now. And there is opportunities out there happening right now. But you're absolutely right. If this goes on, then they could end up forcing more landlords out the market. I mean, even in Fife alone, there's been 1,200 less properties in the last 5 years available for rent. Now, that's a big number in comparison to, I think there's about 20,000 private let properties in Fife. So put that into perspective. That's 1,200 families no longer able to rent, but there's no council housing or social housing to replace that. There's not been 1,200 social or council housing houses being built or available in that time. In fact, I would argue that it's been less.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to this. So this ban doesn't apply.
Yeah, the moratorium on evictions and the rent freeze and things is in place until 31st of March 2023. Yeah. This ban doesn't apply if the tenant is 6 months or more in arrears. So you need to wait 6 months now to then start that process. But that process could still then take up to a year. If you intend to move into or sell your rental property to alleviate financial hardship, that is obviously a grounds. But there's obviously with that, I mean, you can't enforce notices to sell your property at the moment with a sheriff's officer or anything. So bear that in mind. And obviously, if your tenant's no longer living there, then you could prove that. You need to prove that as well. Then obviously the ban doesn't apply for you.
Now, here's the thing: if your tenant abandons the property, you still have to go for possession, don't you?
You still have to do that, and you still have to establish abandonment.
If you've got a PRT in Scotland, you still have to go for possession. Yep. If you've got a short assured tenancy, you don't need to. You just need to prove abandonment, don't you?
Yes, you need to just establish abandonment. But there's a correct way of establishing abandonment, and obviously, if you're a letting agent who's done proper training on things like that. We've done a lot of things like that with the staff, and there's certain ways that you could establish abandonment and prove that a tenant's not living in a property. But remember, if you do need to start legal proceedings, it's vital to serve notice in the correct way, and to avoid being dismissed when you get to the point of the court or the first tier tribunal and the housing chambers, because they will pick it apart.
Well, I mean, the first tier tribunal right now in Scotland is actually looking for mistakes left, right, and centre. They're looking for spelling mistakes. They're looking for anything that could give them any reason to put it back to the landlord to say you've got to start again, in order to avoid the huge the tidal wave that they've got coming on them, and actually pushing that. They're just can I coin a phrase? They're pissing in the wind.
Yeah.
Really, that's what's happening, because I tell you what, it's going to hit them like a tidal wave once that all comes through. And this is what the Scottish government, there is no way to get round that. There's no possible to get round this. They're just kicking the can down the road and actually trying to alleviate the problem, but they're not. They're making it worse. It's just mounting up to this big snowball, cascading down the hill from the very top. And eventually, at some point, it will smash into the bottom. And who it smashes into is going to be the Scottish government.
It's like just delaying the inevitable, really, and
absolutely.
Rather than dealing with this issue,
I think they're just like panicking in the fact that if we delay it, we'll see if we can find a solution to it. The only solution to that is build more houses for affordable and social housing, council housing. I mean, that's the only way to alleviate that position. 70% of the stock since the 1980s in council houses have actually been depleted since they are on the sell-off from the Thatcher government, and have never been replaced. So where does that leave everybody? And a really difficult situation with housing policy. Both governments have had plenty of years. Conservative government have been in, and the SNP government have been in for about 10 years, both. And they failed to recognise that and failed to actually build. Oh, but we can't afford to build, I can hear them say. It's like, okay, but you can find 400 million to go and fight a war, or you can find billions to do something else out of nowhere, magic money tree that we've got. But you can't actually do it for proper social infrastructure improvements, which will actually benefit society in the medium to long term. That is madness. You can't afford not to do it. Anyway, let's get back to the task at hand.
Yeah, so and then obviously the eviction process and things obviously needs to be done correctly, but recovering your unpaid rent from tenants who have already left, regardless of what the scenario is. So regaining possession of your property is one thing, but recouping any unpaid rent is a different process. Now, ideally, your tenant will start paying back after they have left, but if that's not the case, and you wish to claim through the county courts or set up obviously payments once the tenant leaves, then there are certain ways that you could do that. Now you need this is where the referencing process comes in brilliant again, because you need a lot of details of the tenant, and you also need their new address as well. And you need to include all that on a claim form. And if you don't have it, you can apply to the court to serve papers through their work. But you need to know where they work and things like their national insurance number, and these are all things that you need if you're going to go down this route.
This is why some people are actually they try to avoid all that by going to people on Gumtree. Because it's like they realise that they'll not do these stringent checks on them, and therefore they'll never find out about the fact that they've got CCJs or court orders, decrees, where money outstanding have no paid in the past on their accounts. And that's why proper referencing actually picks all that up.
Yeah, definitely. Now, at this point, the threat of a county court judgment and things can probably push a tenant to pay you back and avoid going through that process, have an effect on your credit rating, and it will damage their chances for renting a property or buying a home in the future as well.
I hit the nail on the head, Richard, here. This is what we tell everybody all the time, don't we? I'm pretty draconian when I come to this, because the only reason that you've no paid me is because you've refused to pay even though you can afford it. And you've not made any effort to actually try and resolve this situation. If that's the type of person that you are, then you don't come and stay with us. you know, at our place, because I tell you what, I'll go for the jugular after this. I will not give any reprieve. This is just me personally, to someone who can pay and deliberately doesn't pay because they realise that the law might actually protect them in that instances.
Yeah.
A decree will sit on you for 20 years and follow you around. Now, a decree is equivalent to county court judgment in England and Scotland, in England and Ireland and Wales. And it sits on your account for 20 years. At some point in time, you will get a job and I'll just arrest your wages.
Yeah.
And I'll get the money back anyway. And even worse, you'll have the person that pursued you, the legal advisor, in other words, the lawyer, Lindsay's in my occasion, over in Edinburgh, will put their bill on there as well, and they will recover their cost from you as well. So that original cost won't be there. And this will be something that will follow you around for the next 20 years. And as you said, it will actually damage your chance of probably renting another property and actually possibly even getting a mortgage. Now, that's not me that's caused that problem. That's the person that refused to pay, even though they could pay, or didn't even want to engage and actually resolve the situation deliberately.
Yeah.
Doing that.
And I think as well, like you say, that could really, going through that process could have a real detrimental effect to your credit score. And one of the key elements of purchasing a property, if that's what you intend to do at some point in the future,
Absolutely.
you need a good credit score.
Now, if you go to court and win, it doesn't mean necessarily say your tenant will have the money to pay you what they owe. And that's what I'm saying. It actually sits with you for 20 years as a decree in Scotland.
Until you're at that point, yeah.
Yeah, it follows you around. And then every now and again, I get an email from the solicitor saying, do you want to just put a trace on, you know, to find out where this person is and possibly where they're working? Or do you want to freeze some of their assets? You know, we had that with somebody similar. We actually, they had a second house somewhere that they owned. It's like, we'll just put a freeze on that. And then when they tried to go and sell it, it was like, oh, we can't sell it unless we settle this debt.
Yeah.
I've got you.
Yeah.
Remember, I've got no desire to do this. I just want people to pay their rent when it's due because I'm providing a fantastic service to the person actually renting my property. I don't see any reason why I shouldn't get paid that, because you, after all, again, as I say, when you get a service off of someone, you actually expect them to pay for that service. If you go into Starbucks and say, I'm going to drink your Starbucks, and it's like, oh, by the way, you know, thanks very much, and then walk out without paying. Hello? It's like, where was the payment? And so that's a kind of similar thing. That's how I view it. That's exactly how I view it, and that's probably the same situation in terms of that.
Yeah. Yeah, you could, like you say, apply for an attach on their earnings, in order to take money out of their income and things. But courts do tend to set quite a low amount, but then at the end of the day, at least you're still pursuing them. And I think it's important that people can't just get up and walk away. I think that's the point that we're trying to make here. But given the lengthy obstacles, it's probably come as no surprise that a lot of landlords do just eventually walk away without chasing their unpaid rent, because it can be quite, I mean, especially if you're not knowledgeable in the whole process, and really and a lot of people do walk away, and a lot of tenants who are that type, or people who are that type, know that landlords aren't going to go through this whole this rigmarole, and it's far from ideal, but at least they will have their property back if they are in that situation, and they could then they could move on and start making income again.
And that's what a lot of landlords look at. And this is where I come down to saying, at the very fact that it's because most landlords just have one or two properties, and the expense to chase someone to court actually is a huge amount of money. They try to end up doing it themselves to save it by lodging the paperwork for 50 quid. But if the tenant starts, fighting it, and it's like they didn't want to fight it. With somebody like me, it's like, no, there is no reprieve anymore. I used to just let it go all the time and just say, well, I'll just get somebody in, I'll just get it rented. But I was continually having to pay something like £2,000 and £3,000 actually to get the property turned around and refurbed again, because the person actually left it in some sort of state. Now, that in the beginning, 30 years ago, remember, there was no sort of reference.
Things were different. Like
I've gone through all the problems that everybody else is going through right now when they first start. Hence the reason why we're able to head that off at the pass and actually give people the right advice on what they need to do in order to set it up properly in the beginning. I've trodden that path already. I've made it into a super highway, effectively. So you can just get in your car and drive in a straight line and get to the point where you're getting to. Whereas I had to go zigzag, 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 and then chop down trees and all the rest of it to plan and put this path in place, and then change it into basically an A road, and then change it into a motorway, and then change it into a super highway. You know, the way we were doing things to make it far more efficient. So I understand the process now, and it's easy for me then to just circumvent that and send that on to a specialist solicitor who actually does that for me for a nominal amount in terms of the time it would take me to go through all this. But I know full well that they'll actually get the decree. And it's only in these instances. In some instances, I actually just, I still go for it. I still go for it. There was a time where you'd say, well, the person's a man of straw, and it's like, well, I've got 20 years to wait.
Yeah.
It's like at some point in time, they'll get a job. At some point in time, they'll want to do something. And it's like, and what they've done is the consequences of their actions. And it's not me, it's they've done it to themselves. And people should be accountable for doing things like that. They shouldn't just think, oh, that's fine, I'll just shit on somebody else and that'll be okay. Because I don't think that's acceptable at all. So now I actually pursue it to the end, and it's not an end because it lasts 20 years with that person.
Yeah, and I think anybody else in that situation should don't be put off. I think you really need to follow it through, because it just facilitates people to just think that they could keep doing that. But I think, obviously, we've covered a lot of the worst case scenarios. It isn't always like that. I think that if you have the right people doing the right things at the beginning, whether it's your agent doing referencing or you're doing it yourself, meeting the person, going through that whole process in the first instance, sets the tone for a whole tenancy. Or if you do come up to these problems, know how to deal with it properly, know how to speak to the tenant and how to work together to sort things out. If you would like any other advice about getting your tenants back on track with their rent, or if you're looking for any advice from an agent like myself, obviously, or Jim, and looking for something.
I didn't rope me into this.
or to take, but I mean, obviously,
I'm an investor now. I'm no longer a letting agent.
Or for somebody to take care of things, then obviously feel free to speak to me. My number and my email and things are in the blog that's attached to the show today. So feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to speak to anybody.
My final words on this is, bear in mind, and this is to everybody that's been watching and listening so far, it's like I could count on one hand the amount of times I've had to evict people. Maybe that's maybe
as I say, the worst
I've actually finally gone to the eviction, to the court or the tribunal, in order to get somebody out. Now that's 30 years of this, and a significant amount of properties in my portfolio. So I could count on one hand. Most people actually understand. Most people are genuinely okay, and they just say, yeah, I know I'm due rent. I know, I'm happy to leave.
And
I'll go and find somewhere else more affordable. We'll agree a payment plan. We'll try and sort that out. And that's another story, how that happens and how that pans out. Because sometimes it just doesn't. They disappear and they don't want to pay it. That's another story where I'd go, nah, I'm pursuing you for it. Because I don't think it's right to do that to people. And it, I wouldn't say for want of, we need to teach you a lesson. It's like you look at the circumstance and you go, yes, you can afford this. You can definitely afford this, and you're just deliberately not paying it. So that's the only reason I would pursue somebody. If somebody was in financial hardship and it's like, it's going to make it worse and it's going to push them over the edge, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm just going to leave it. I'll just leave it, move on. We've learned a lesson. They've probably learned a lesson as well. And I see these people. I see these people now and again, and we just speak to each other okay now, and everything's fine. It's like life's too short. Life's too short. That's the reality. Sometimes you don't do that, and that's it. Jeanette actually makes a final comment here. Never followed through before. Always let it go. Fantastic advice. Thank you. Hopefully you got something with that, Jeanette. If anybody else, a lot of people will be the same. Please feel free to say as well. It's important that we get vital feedback to see we're going in the right direction, we're giving the right advice. And if you're a tenant out there as well, please speak to your letting agent or landlord or investor to if anything happens, or if you know anything's going to happen, to make sure you're in the right position. Until tomorrow night is the weekly update at 7 o'clock.
And then
Monday is the Wealth Creation Show. What we're doing the Wealth Creation Show, do you remember?
It's 10 tips to I forgot the title now.
10 tips to increase your wealth, actually.
Increase your
And
wealth,
it's really
that's
good
it.
ones. It's really, everybody can use them. We'll see you on Monday.
that'll be a good
We
one.
won't see you tomorrow night for the weekly update. Bye-bye for now.